ever pondered over why Russia sold Alaska to the United States? It's a question that might seem simple at first glance, but it's far from it. This story is steeped in history, filled with political maneuvering, economic pressures, and international relations. It's a tale that takes us back to a time when the world was a different place, when nations were drawn together and pushed apart by the currents of history. To understand this, we need to dive into the history of the two nations. The story starts in the mid-18th century when Russia began to explore and settle Alaska. The vast, icy wilderness of Alaska, teeming with wildlife and natural resources, was a new frontier for the Russian Empire. The first Russian expedition to reach Alaska was led by the intrepid explorer Vitus Bering in 1741. This marked the beginning of a significant chapter in the history of the region. Alaska, with its strategic location and rich resources, was an attractive prospect for the Russians. It was a gateway to the Pacific and a potential stronghold against other colonial powers. The discovery of sea otters and their valuable fur was an added incentive, sparking a lucrative fur trade that drew many Russian adventurers and traders to these frosty shores. The Russian-American Company, a joint stock company chartered by Tsar Paul I, played a pivotal role in the exploration and settlement of Alaska. The company was given monopolistic control over trade in the region and was responsible for establishing permanent settlements. It was the driving force behind the fur trade, which became the economic backbone of Russian Alaska. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The harsh climate and the vast distances from mainland Russia posed significant challenges. The settlers also had to navigate relations with the indigenous Alaskan tribes, from whom they learned essential survival skills and techniques for hunting and trapping. Despite the potential, the fur trade in Alaska was not as profitable as initially hoped. The sea otter population began to dwindle due to overhunting, and the costs of maintaining the settlements were high. The Russian-American Company found it increasingly difficult to turn a profit. Moreover, the strategic importance of Alaska became a double-edged sword. As the geopolitical situation in Europe became more volatile, Russia found itself in a precarious position. Holding on to Alaska meant potential conflict with other colonial powers, particularly the British, who were expanding their influence in North America. Despite the potential, managing this distant land was proving to be a challenge for Russia. The hardships of the wilderness, the financial strain, and the geopolitical risks all combined to cast a shadow over Russia's Alaskan adventure. Russia faced numerous hurdles in holding on to Alaska. At first glance, Alaska seemed like a treasure trove, a land of promise and potential. But the reality was far more complex and challenging. The vast expanse of the land, coupled with its harsh climate, made it difficult for Russia to establish a strong foothold. The logistics of managing such a remote territory was a Herculean task, even for a superpower like Russia. The costs of maintaining the colony were enormous. The Russian-American Company, which was in charge of the Alaskan territory, was constantly in financial trouble. The expenses of administering such a vast land, coupled with the cost of defending it, was a significant drain on the company's resources. Moreover, the primary reason for Russia's interest in Alaska was the fur trade. But the population of fur-bearing animals, such as the sea otters, began to dwindle rapidly due to overhunting. As the fur trade declined, so did the economic viability of the Alaskan colony. Then came the Crimean War in the mid-19th century. This war put a significant strain on Russia's finances. The cost of war was high, and Russia found itself in a precarious economic situation. The war also exposed Russia's vulnerability. Despite its size and military strength, Russia struggled to defend its far-flung territories, including Alaska. This war also made Russia fear a future conflict with Britain or other major powers. They were worried that in case of a future war, they might lose Alaska without any compensation. Given their financial situation and the logistical challenges, they feared that they might not be able to defend Alaska effectively. This fear, coupled with the logistical and financial challenges, made Russia rethink its strategy. They started to question whether holding on to Alaska was worth the trouble and the risk. The depletion of fur-bearing animals, the high cost of maintaining the colony, and the fear of losing Alaska in a future war without any compensation. All these factors made Russia reconsider its position. Thus, Russia began to consider the idea of selling Alaska. The decision to sell Alaska was not just about money. It was a strategic move. Let's delve into the story behind the scenes. The negotiations between Russia and the United States were not just diplomatic dances. They were intricate games of geopolitical chess, where every move mattered. Russia, under the rule of Tsar Alexander II, was caught in a precarious position. The country was financially drained from wars and was unable to sustain a colony as distant as Alaska. The agreed price, a sum of $7.2 million. Now that might not sound like a lot today, but back in the late 1800s, it was a substantial amount. The negotiations culminated in the signing of the treaty on March 30th, 1867. However, the sale was more than a mere transaction. It was a strategic decision taken with a long-term vision. Russia saw this sale as a way to strengthen the United States, tipping the global scales in their favor. The United States was seen as a counterbalance to Russia's rival, Great Britain. By empowering the United States, Russia hoped to keep Britain's growing global influence in check. This was a classic example of the enemy of my enemy is my friend strategy. One might argue that Russia sold its future prosperity for a short-term gain. However, at that time, the Tsar and his advisors believed they were making the best decision for their nation. They were not selling a chunk of ice. They were buying a strategic advantage. They were not just selling land. They were selling a potential problem to their rival's rival. The motivations behind the sale of Alaska were multi-layered and complex, reflecting the intricacies of geopolitics and the challenges faced by nations navigating the turbulent waters of international relations. These strategic decisions, made over a century ago, continue to shape the world we live in today. And thus, Russia sold Alaska, a decision that continues to intrigue historians and enthusiasts alike. The sale of Alaska had significant implications, many of which are still evident today. The discovery of gold and oil in Alaska proved to be a boon for the United States, reaping rewards far beyond the initial purchase price. In retrospect, the sale of Alaska represents a pivotal moment in history, a strategic move influenced by geopolitical pressures and economic necessities. So, next time someone brings up the sale of Alaska, you can tell them it was more than just a simple transaction. It was a strategic chess move in the grand game of geopolitics.